Hi Alice.
Oh, hello. Are we in the right place then?
I was actually about to resend your email from last week.
mm, yeah. What happened last week? I can't remember. It was the wrong time. Was it? Is it 10:30 again?
Is it now consistently at 10:30? That might be
I
it.
think that might be the case. Yeah. So I've just done the same thing again 2 weeks in a row.
See, I told Glenn I was on leave last week, so actually I wasn't planning to come anyway. But
Yes.
but then he wasn't sure whether he was going to have time to come, so it was all left a bit hanging.
Yeah.
So
No, it's coming back to me now. I was like just replaying that whole scenario, and it was.
it would make sense because 2 weeks ago I joined at 10, and there was me and Dennis and Valerie, and basically Nigel wasn't going to be able to make it till 10:30.
Yeah, I think
Which
that's
was,
the case. And then I think they said we've only got half an hour again this week.
oh, thank God for that, because I've got a meeting I've set scheduled thing for 11, so that's that
Yeah.
helpful.
And I haven't really done my homework because I think I was supposed to do what you'd done and send a sort of page of points that may or may not be good to include or something like this. So
Okay, well, I'm totally at sea as to where we are with this. It seems very kind of a bit disjointed, and I don't really know what I'm doing half the time. But actually, I just noticed that Nigel did circulate a draft, didn't he?
he did, yeah. And
On
so
holiday.
last time was the first time I'd come, and I said, "Is that thing that just got circulated by email? You know, if I just read that, am I up to speed?" Kind of thing. And he said, "Yes, I think."
Okay. Well, I think that just tells me what I should do for the
So
next
that's
20
what I should do.
minutes.
Yeah. I should have a closer look at it for the next half an hour, and might actually be able to have an.
Yeah. Oh well, that gives me some concrete to do, so I can do that. That
The
sounds good.
last time I think we talked a lot about, I was a bit confused about the sort of scope of it, because I think in our consortium, data is like one of many areas that contribute to the whole modelling effort. But I think the whole thing in this is a much broader scope. So data pretty much covers all of modelling, really, doesn't it? And
Yes, that explains a bit more. So
that's
it's
why
just
they were interested in putting things about software engineering and visualization in there. And I was sort of thinking, in our world, we don't categorize those in the sort of
okay.
data section, but I think it's everything behind the modelling data, really, isn't it?
Right, I'm with you. Okay, well, I think that gives us a useful thing to do for the next half hour.
Yes, I'll go and
See you in half an
again
hour.
in 25 minutes then. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Morning.
Hi.
We obviously got the time right then. Between. I wasn't quite sure this morning what was
No, I must admit I did join at 10 and
oh, did you? Oh, dear.
but then I remembered when I joined and it was only me and Ian, and it all came back to me that I'd done exactly the same last week. And
Yeah, I'm not sure. We need to check with Nigel what he plans going forward, because I seem to remember that he said it was last week and this week, and then after that he was okay at 10 o'clock. So we just need we just need to between us to decide what we can
send out a new calendar invitation or something.
Anyway, so how are you?
Oh, not bad. It's been very hectic though, so I have to admit to not having sent round my points that I was hoping to have done.
I just keep looking at all the lists of things I'm meant to be doing, stuff that I'm meant to be reading, and I start and then I do a little bit.
Yes.
And I run out of time and I've only got through 2 sections or something.
Some things just don't work in the sort of like little gaps between Zoom calls, do they? And then you're sort of, you can get behind yourself and just be going from call to call where you're not properly prepared. I
think I'm not doing it right though. I mean, in terms of
I'm not sure any of us feel we're doing it.
In terms of commenting on things, I think maybe you know, because I really want to keep going in and doing a little bit when I've got half an hour or something, but I can't do the whole thing. And this system of sort of saving and putting your initials at the end and so on, it doesn't quite work for me.
I think you do need proper like collaborative editing going on, don't you, to work that way.
I'm sort of thinking what I need to do is do it in a different document and then, you know, combine all the changes afterwards. But anyway, I think, I mean, that's a feasible way of doing it, I think. Anyway.
Morning, folks.
Morning.
Hi.
Morning.
And we just need the boss. Morning, Lorenza.
Morning.
You're never sure whether to say hello or whether to wait. And you don't know whether somebody's picture is going to appear or not.
I wasn't as sneaky as I thought. I was trying to read the data document online yesterday, and I had some comments. That's why I wanted to appear. I wasn't planning to, but I thought.
Well, hopefully Nigel will join us any minute. He has another meeting, I think, at 10, which is why we moved this one to past. So that might be running over a little bit. Morning, Dennis.
Morning.
There we go. Morning, Nigel.
Hello, everybody. Excellent. We get bigger each week. With each passing week, momentum is building. That's great. Well, thank you. I just give you an update. Well, welcome to Lorenzo and welcome to Ian. Great to see you both. Thank you. We'll come on to where obviously we'd love to have your your input. Just to say that Jasmina and I had a discussion over the weekend and had a discussion around data and models. And so there, if you look in the Dropbox, you'll see an extended version of the integrated paper, which includes material from her, and I've also added some additional material. I think Glenn may have had a go at it as well, if that's Glenn, I think.
Yeah, I did, yeah.
So we've been adding, I mean, there are one or two things I'd like to discuss today, obviously. But Ian, I don't know, have you had a chance to catch sight of the draft paper at this point?
I had a quick look at the version that you circulated last Thursday.
Yeah.
I hadn't caught up with the revised version in Dropbox.
So in Dropbox, there just is a latest version, which is which you can just sort by where it appears on top of the list, really. And be very interested to kind of talk about contributions around particularly standing up future capability in the data ecosystem. Lorenzo, welcome. Have you had a chance to get up to speed?
Yeah. Hi, yeah. So okay, so I feel like a bit an outsider. I am kind of I'm in SPI-M, so I spent lots of time during this year working on the pandemic, and I had very little time to breathe. I originally kind of tried to participate a bit, but then over winter with the new variant, it just went all crazy. So I'm not really attempting to push myself in any way. I'm just looking where I can be of use, and then maybe kind of contribute to one or two papers, something like that. So yesterday I went through the data paper because I had, well, I did handle data much more than usual. I'm a mathematician, so I typically am data free. But during this pandemic, I've used quite a lot of the data streams. I just came in to bring some comments on the last draft. So I read it last night. I should have added the comments there, but then because people edited it this morning, I just didn't assume anybody does anything before 10. The main comment I wanted to bring today is that I went through it, and it's obviously great. There is a lot of material that I completely sympathize with. The main feeling I had, which is the one I wanted to share, is that it's heavily COVID-19 based.
Yeah.
It's very, very much all about COVID-19, which is what I would naturally tend to do, given I've just lived and breathed COVID-19. But I had the impression that Dennis and Valerie were aiming for something a bit more future pandemics, open-ended things. Yeah. So that was the main comment in general. There is nothing I would disagree with what's written there. It's all kind of, it seems like 95% what happened in COVID rather than data challenges for the future.
Actually, that's a really interesting point coming in at this point. I'd welcome Valerie and Dennis's view on that, the extent to which we are clearly very influenced by the lived experience. And I think writing that up was quite a good use case for us. Just before I come to them to comment, one thing that I still think would be quite helpful is Jasmina's stuff's been really, really helpful, particularly the kind of questions that have been asked at pace by policymakers and where you need to get new data from and how you'd need to re-section or re-slice and dice existing data if you had to, and how we support that process. So that was very helpful. I suppose the thing that wasn't so obvious was in the vanilla case of you're there in SPI-M, you've got to do some modeling of the as is. What actually are the data sets, or in fact, is it what we would naturally expect? There are no great surprises as to what's been used in either the agent-based simulation work or in the SPEAR styles of models. Just a paragraph explaining what data is used. I mean, because that's something that I suspect we imagine there's a much denser and richer realm of data informing these models from the outset than may be the case. It may be that there are actually quite broad estimators that are put in there to get these things out. But a reality check on that. If you could help us with that, Lorenzo, that would be great. Just as an added piece of context for us. but to come back to your question, it's an interesting one. And Valerie, Dennis, what is, it is heavily COVID, now you say that, and I was kind of thinking we were writing a special issue that was heavily informed by COVID. So have we misread our homework?
Well, sorry, I got as far as reading. Well, I did try and read the paper last night too.
Yeah.
And I started commenting, and then I had to, I ran out of time. So I got sort of more and more cursory, but my overall impression, which I did write at the beginning of section 8.1, is that I think we, like Lorenzo, it needs turning round a bit at the moment. It's so heavily, this is what happened, this is COVID. And somehow, obviously the challenges for the future come out of what we've discovered trying to cope with COVID. But if we can turn it round so that it's more focused on what will be the challenges for future pandemics, which might or might not be similar. I mean, many of the challenges will presumably be similar, particularly as far as data are concerned. But if we can sort of turn it round to say, to use COVID as an example, rather than as the focus of the narrative, I think that would be good. And for example, in just for as one point in the data engineering thing, you've got a sentence which says, it talks about the FAIR principles, and says the reality is that while there's increasing awareness of the principles, concrete and consistent implementation has lagged far behind. But if one could go a little bit further and say why it's lagged behind, or what can be done to overcome that for the future, that would be a sort of an added bit of added value, really.
Sure. Okay, no, I think that's right. I mean, I suppose we were perhaps more aware, or I was more aware as a non-domain specialist in infectious diseases, that we wanted to be true to the facts of the matter and not kind of just imagine they were this and that way. So, but I take your point. That ought to be relatively straightforward if we kind of tilt to this happened here, but the lesson for us going forward is X, and then that will be, I mean, almost the section headings could be tweaked and represented in that way. Yeah, that's.
It really wasn't a criticism. Like, no. This is exactly the same way I reacted initially when I kind of tried to jump in these things.
Yeah.
I think the pragmatic approach I'm taking now is, I think about what I struggled with during the pandemic, what really irritated me, of things that didn't work well. Yeah, and then I kind of turn it into a challenge, imagining I'm dealing with a future pandemic. Yeah.
If on reading this you are provoked into saying, yeah, but my experience on this for the data requirements are this, that'll just really help us hugely. And I think to the material that Ian contributed, I mean, that whole idea of pre-positioning a framework and a method and a description of various roles, as is the case with the EPIC work. I think that's a nice example of where you can anticipate what you might need for the future from kind of experience. Ian, I mean, just in that sense, I mean, do you think we've, and again, of course, in some sense, some of that work was from a non-human infectious diseases perspective. It was a completely different context. Yeah.
Which actually should be good. It should actually help us to retilting it towards a more general focus, I would imagine. It certainly wouldn't be hard to kind of frame that, you know, the EPIC material especially, into contribute to a wider agenda. So that should be good. One thought, for perhaps for Lorenzo, one thing that Graham Medley said a few months ago about how the different modelling groups in SPI-M are actually all tapping into different data streams, which I thought was actually both very important, very sensible, and perhaps something that really should be trying to be facilitated.
Yeah, I'm happy to comment on this. I didn't really want to kind of, I've already spoken enough, and I didn't.
No, actually, Lorenzo, I think one thing we're quite conscious of, we like the voice of the people at the coalface building the models as well, because I think we can have a view on what the desirable would be in terms of clean knowledge engineering principles or an ideal life cycle, but actually why and how things have been modified in the face of what's required would be important.
So I will not be able to really address this question fully, and the answer is that there are different groups in SPI-M, and each group has their own model that is constructed however they decided to build it, which depends also on when they built it and with what purpose and which kind of niche they were trying to cover. I can tell you about our model because I tried to build it just before or just after the first peak, when there was a call to kind of do a bit of short-term projections. The data streams available were the hospital data streams more than anything else, because the NHS is collecting this data anyway. And so my model is fundamentally informed by hospital data streams and project hospital data streams. So it's a compartmental model that is heavily concentrated on the hospitals. And I'm basically, in my model, I'm ignoring everything that happens outside of hospital. I mean, I have it in the model, but it's not informed by any particular data streams. Other groups were building a community model, not so much hospital. And so I still feel I don't think there is any model that really connects the two properly. I think, well, some of the bigger models are informed by data streams at multiple levels, but I've always noticed throughout the pandemic, there was a model about overall deaths that was fitted to overall deaths and predicting overall deaths, and our model was on hospital and predicting hospitals, and there was no connection between these two. It's very difficult to connect simultaneously in the same model, hospitals and community, which is what we are trying to deal now, but basically there has not been much time to actually improve the model. The other thing is our model, because there was no age structure data early on, my model doesn't have any age structure. We are trying to build an age structure because vaccination really requires the age structure, but I shied away because many other models had age structure. And I was like, you know what, it's probably more interesting to see whether my model fails at capturing some aspects of the pandemic because it doesn't have the age structure. So there were choices dictated by pragmatism and by the fact that other models were covering other aspects that therefore I didn't have to cover, and my model was covering some bits that other models didn't. So in that sense, there is a lot of data that I'm absolutely not using in SPI-M. It also takes time to understand this data, see what the limitations are, get the permission to use them if needed. In many cases, that's trivial because it's just offered to SPI-M as a whole. But yes, the key point is that there are multiple data streams. No model uses them all. Some models use more, some models use less. And I can frankly only comment about my model. So.
But Lorenzo, that's already very interesting. I guess one question I'd have then is there any meta modeling of the fath that you're all sitting here with all these models, and there must be the kind of rationale you've just presented about why you would try it out till it failed, and if it did, that would be interesting because it would show that it didn't have to be sensitive to age compartmentalization, for example. Is there explicit opportunity to reflect on those learned lessons across the models? And if not, it probably should. I mean, it just sounds like
yeah. No, I completely agree. So again, I'll try to keep it brief because maybe we want to talk about something else as well, rather than just SPI-M. But there is a formal statistical combination procedure that takes the estimation of R and the medium-term projections of the different models. And I think there are maybe 10 models that do estimations of R. And then there is a formal statistical procedure that combines these models and create an overall number, which is the one that then goes on the government website. So that is the meta model I think you're talking about to a certain extent. In terms of how different models compare, I would have liked to have the time to actually understand other models, in particular the differences between my predictions and some other models' predictions. There has never been the time to actually go into details. However, the positive aspect of this lack of kind of cross checks is that these models are as independent as you could have them, and therefore the model combination is as close as possible to its kind of ideal assumption of model combination, where the different expert opinions are independent of each other. They're clearly based on transmission models, so they're not completely independent, but because I don't know what other people are doing, there is no risk that I'm copying part of it. Yeah. So, but this is I fear this. So this is extremely interesting, and I'd like to spend hours talking to you about this. But it also risks sticking back to COVID-19. While I would like to kind of try to push more towards the future.
Although I would imagine that could be a very self-similar problem in other contexts, that you have a lot of competing models and the issue about how you can choose between them or aggregate them or independent.
It becomes the problem I'm having while reading. It was a lot about data, and I know that there is something about estimation, another challenge about estimation, and I'm a little bit I have quite a few challenges about the link between the two, and I didn't know exactly where to put them, because it's not a challenge necessarily about the data, but it's a challenge about estimation that is heavily related to kind of the problems with the data, and I didn't know where to put them. So that's another question I wanted to ask, and this is really like a future problem. Maybe
Ben and Glenn between them could say just a little bit about how data fits into the modeling and estimation.
I was just going to say that there is an explicit couple of paragraphs in the estimation paper on model comparison and combination. So that is something that we are planning to cover there.
Yeah, I'm just to quote an example of this. Say you want to fit your model to testing data. One of the issues we had is that at the beginning of let's talk about the pandemic in general. At the very beginning, your data is extremely poor. Testing is not necessarily well developed. The not only in terms of like it's not readily available, but even the tests, you do test people, and your testing kit just fails, has a high false negative rate, and the test progresses throughout the pandemic. So you record all this testing data, but the data actually means different things over time.
Yeah.
So you either correct the data stream, or you have a model that accounts for that, or in the very simplest of ways, you just ignore you just decide to fit only to the second wave rather than to the first wave, because you say, well, testing was completely different before. This is a challenge that I wouldn't know whether to put in the data paper or in the estimation paper.
So I think
for
there's
example,
discussion of it in both. So there's a section of the data 8.3, which is to do with the life cycle of the data collection. So there's kind of some reference to it there, but we've kept it to a minimum because there's a more detailed discussion in the estimation paper, both in sections. I think 7.3 is the one that still needs a bit of work, particularly, but and 7.4 as well. I think that Glenn, TJ, and I have been working on a lot of this comparison, and the ability to estimate is, as you say, is very dependent on your data reliability or sparsity. So there's definitely sections there, but if you have any comments on either of those that you think could be clarified, then please do contribute.
I think
how you actually refine the metadata or the data sets themselves in flight is a really interesting challenge, I think, for everyone in this context. Yeah, I'm sure we have brilliant.
Yeah, I think something I'd like to make sure gets in here is some kind of statement that says that we want to be better at collecting information that helps us to correct for these biases in the future. So, you know, I guess something about denominator population characterization, and and actually I hadn't actually thought about the fact that the tests themselves are sensitivity and specificity is changing over time as well.
And I
think these are generic issues that will always come up, with disease tests, but also other data as well.
Yeah, and I have to be frank. This is it's a challenge I experienced, but I hadn't. I mean, this came out of a discussion that I had with Francesca yesterday. Because Francesca is a new postdoc that just started with us, and so basically she managed to go through many of the papers and had some ideas and thoughts. So this is frankly her thought. I just realized that there was this meeting at 10:30, so I just thought about jumping in. But it was originally suggested by her that really early on. The other thing that this is slipping into estimation, I think. The other thing is that very early on, she said there are lots of estimates of parameters that are done with really poor and crappy data, and they are never updated as estimates. Partly is because they are, partly because it's not as sexy to kind of redo an estimation and slightly update a previous estimate. You don't get a science publication because of that, fundamentally. And second is because sometimes it becomes completely impossible. How do you estimate R0 once the entire world is in continuous control on and off? How do you estimate the generation time? So for example, the time between infection and onset of symptoms has been mostly calculated at the beginning of the epidemic, because you knew people were developing symptoms somewhere in China and they traveled for one day to Wuhan. And so you know that they got it in Wuhan that day, fundamentally, okay? They might have some windows, so you have right and left censoring, but that's how you typically estimate the infection to onset of symptoms distribution. And later on in the pandemic, you can use test and trace data, but it's heavily biased towards symptomatic cases, and you have all sorts of issues. But this is estimation. Sorry, I didn't really want to kind of.
I'm not sure it is entirely in the.
I'm not sure it's estimation.
Okay.
Because
sorry, Richard. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it is something that we've worried about quite a bit with trying to construct this data pipeline, and I mean, it's the reason why we introduced this kind of issue tracker in the data, was to basically allow us to flag up data retrospectively, often to say, actually, there's something desperately wrong with this data, and it would at least, if not invalidate, at least warn all downstream users of that data product to say, look, there's something wrong with this. I mean, partly to flag up the fact that maybe something wrong with the analyses coming out, but also to flag up the things that need updating, to say, actually, this is now something that we've assigned a high level of uncertainty to, that we think there's something desperately wrong with this parameter. And so it needs to be investigated. I mean, the thing that we've never resolved, and I think that that this issue tracker combined with the traceability framework work well to handle this in the kind of simplest case, but immediately you come across a problem that we want to do, that we were looking at meta-analyses to combine all of these uncertain estimates to produce a more reliable estimate. But the traceability framework just propagates the uncertainty through the issue, through the meta-analysis, which is completely wrong, and we haven't resolved how to handle that yet. But it's nonetheless, I mean, it's something that we should be able to do. We should be able to specifically say that this code run does not propagate these errors. But we haven't worked out how to do that sensibly. But it's something that we were very concerned about.
Yeah, I think if I can just add to that slightly, I think that's kind of an interesting point, is how that the things driving the need for the data to change, or the fact that the data changes, whichever way around it is, and linking that to the sort of data engineering and platform side of things is quite interesting. Like, how do you build the platform? Because I think Richard just mentioned two ways you have to accommodate that, which is that you might need sort of versioning of the data because it gets superseded, and you might need to be able to flag up issues you find later with the data and have that propagate through to things you calculate. And then there's also this kind of third one that I think you were talking about in your challenge, Lorenzo, which is that either the definition of the data or the kind of way it's gathered can evolve. And that, I think that's the hardest one to then capture in your data management systems.
I mean, it was something that, again, we were specifically thinking about, and we were using Semver to track the versioning, and saying that across major versions there may be changes at least in the structure of the data, but the only solution we really had to this data is qualitatively different from its predecessor was to change the name in the namespace that we were using for that data set.
And how do you decide at what point some kind of like slightly evolving thing with the same name is actually a different thing?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, this is great. I mean, this is all good material. I mean, by the way, and trouble is, we have a deadline and we have a paper that we need to consolidate. But these are really great insights, and trying to take notes, and we're recording this to capture how we modify the text. One thing I want to come on to before we close out today is how we just can allocate subparts of this. So the next time we come together, we kind of each had a go at the sections again and then reintegrate, because I think we're just, there needs to be more careful reflection on each section, and the right references into the background literature and the upcoming literature need to be made. So we just need to turn it into that kind of scholarly article. I think if we can delegate that out for some the major sections, that'll help us get to a next iteration. One thing I'd like to just talk about is the area of standing up. I mean, one big feature for the challenges is, what does a future surveillance ecosystem look like? What do we need to pre-position? Ian, I know you've been thinking about this. We've captured quite a lot of your comments in the section, but I just wondered whether there was stuff we were missing, or comments that you want to make on how some of the challenges that you've seen in earlier sections come through in the recommendations being made, like functional role distinctions and this whole panoply of different roles one would ideally like. Of course, in reality, you've got some poor bugger in SPI-M who's asked to do everything, you know, kind of literally, or more, almost everything. Yeah.
So we felt as well. Okay, I mean, I think the answer is, I mean, it's good. I could see the markers, I could see the hooks that were being put in to some of the stuff that we were saying, and I thought, great, I've got something. This is something concrete I can knock my head against and kind of edit and write into. So I don't have any detailed suggestions, apart from the fact that, yeah, I could see where the hooks were. And now that there actually is a concrete document, I was happy to spend some time writing into it.
Great. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Well, that's good. Had we made a decision? Where'd we gotten to on visualization? I know that we were thinking last time we spoke that maybe this deserved a separate paper. Actually, I don't know. Has anything progressed on that?
I think the paper in the basic paper for describing various of actions, various of potential visualization we can be implemented and used in this pandemic management, and it has largely been written. And I think the things you mentioned early on about how the visualization will be used to support the future actually is somehow connected to what Richard and Alice talk about, as you mentioned, is a part of the infrastructure. When we have a lot of data, and when the data are certainly not certain, then if we consider all the modeling scientists are the generals in the war, what they need is to access the information quicker. It's not necessarily the data has to be certain. There's not necessarily data has to be all collected. It's not possible in a wartime. But what you want is that they be able to see the data quickly. So each of them need a war room, more or less sort of all the maps, all the things laid out. But in order to do that, and we can do it digitally, we don't need to give them a physical war room, but we can have a infrastructure. And that is the things we try to do through the SCRC, is to deliver the data infrastructure with the visualization infrastructure, so all the data can be somehow seen at a glance very, very quickly. Hopefully, modeling scientists can really sort of reduce their difficulties to accessing data, see the data, so they can use their the intelligence or come out with better models.
Okay, great. And also, just looking at the latest version of the document, I noticed Ben made a comment around referencing out to some of the same challenges in things like climate modeling. I mean, you know, that some of these exact issues about updating data with better data estimators or better data assets, actually plugging gaps, are live there. How far of other papers gone outside of infectious diseases entirely for some insights? Is that, I mean, something we can certainly reference some of the best efforts, but I mean, we're not going to spend long talking about them. I just wondered, when we say it's too much about COVID, we are staying largely within the scope of infectious disease, right? That's what I'm assuming. That's
I
what.
think so. Yeah, we have talked about climate modelling in the estimation paper because a lot of the challenges that we highlighted there had some kind of
Right.
discussion, or at least some attempts in other sort of similar fields elsewhere. So I don't think there's any. Well, I guess Valerie and Dennis can disagree with me on this, but I think if there's clearly some pointer that we can make, not referencing lots of papers, but just saying this challenge has been addressed in other areas, then it's it's helpful for people wanting to take these challenges forward, in the next few years, in knowing what the references are elsewhere. And I mentioned climate because I'm familiar with some of the papers, but there's clearly similarities with greenhouse gas emissions and estimation of fluxes and things that have similar sorts of multi-model comparisons and combinations that work has already been done in those areas on these sorts of questions.
From the point of view of comparisons to other data pipelines and things like that, I mean, Alice, although unfortunately she just had to go, I mean, their fusion data pipeline is something that she's been very heavily involved in for years at UKAEA. So she may have some insights about at least different comparisons, because we've lent heavily on their expertise in constructing data pipelines for ours.
I'm afraid I also have to dash to another meeting. Reading through the paper, I just put together a bullet point list of challenges that I thought I would consider data challenges.
Yeah.
I didn't want to kind of be the one that just slams a bullet point list at the top of the paper and leaves other people.
No. If you could just drop that in as a separate paper, Lorenzo, into the Dropbox, that would be fantastic. I mean, I think that's actually how we incorporated a lot of the original material. We're just,
And to give you credit, many of these things kind of slightly reappear in other sections, so they could be easily subsumed into other sections, in the sense that people, like, I'm certainly not the first person who thinks about them. No. It's basically a bullet point of things that I found quite annoying throughout the pandemic. But there are a couple of things I would like to just bring out now before going. One is data sharing across countries. So the data on testing is always extremely biased. I was thinking Italy, at the beginning, they just realized that there was an infection in a couple of towns. They just locked down the towns. They tested everybody in the town. Clearly, the number of cases you get at that point depend on the speed at which you are testing, rather than the speed at which the disease is spreading. So testing is potentially heavily affected by biases in how you collect the data. So hospitalizations tend to be much more reliable because it is also affected by individuals' behavior, but in general is a less biased data stream. And this is not just self-promotion, but at the beginning there were quite a few issues in understanding how quickly this epidemic was spreading in the UK, and the numbers estimated from China were not accurate at all. And what really allowed me to kind of start screaming in SPI-M that it's doubling every 3 days rather than every 5 or 6 as it was estimated, is that I could look at publicly available hospitalization data from Italy. So that was absolutely a lifesaver and a game changer. Ultimately, it's the same speed at which it was growing in terms of testing and deaths in many European countries. But it was very difficult to say this is correct if you only had testing data. So data sharing across countries is something that is a massive challenge, and it's I felt it kind of allowed the UK to enter in lockdown just in time to avoid the NHS being overwhelmed. That's my feeling. You never know about the counterfactual, but it was a game changer for me. And the second one, another challenge is this scientific recognition for the data collection and the data cleaning, especially the data cleaning. There are loads of people that spent a long time trying to clean data. And there were kind of early repositories from China of people that just decided, you know what, I'm just going to compile this repository and put it out there. And they maybe didn't get a publication out of it, for example. And there was an early repository that we used to estimate the some like time to infection, from infection to onset of symptoms, or just publicly available data put there by a random guy that thought it was a good idea. So those two challenges, I think, are properly data challenge rather than estimation challenges, and I feel like they're important. And then there are other things that I don't know whether they are challenges or not, like clarifying whether the data you're collecting is for control or for survey purposes is not in itself a challenge, but being clear. For example, like test and trace data is there to control infection, so it has all sorts of biases that are not accounted for, not corrected for, while the ONS data is a survey. It doesn't matter. People don't need to act on it. People just need to collect that data and use it for analysis in the future. And issues of missingness in the data, it would be great if future data set, where they have a blank cell, they would say this is blank because nothing has been recorded here yet, or whether it's blank because something has happened but I couldn't be bothered putting anything in. This really ruins any estimation procedure if you don't have this piece of information.
Yeah, I have mentioned quite a lot about both metadata and observation processes in one or multiple papers. I can't remember which ones. So I would absolutely agree. I think that's a huge problem, huge challenge.
Yeah, and I think in the cycle between data and model that you mentioned in this paper, I thought under that there could be, this is kind of key, because those who collect data just calculate how many cases have been infected, for example, and they don't tell you what the denominator is. So if you want to calculate a ratio, for example, what's the secondary attack rate in households, you need to know how many people get infected in households, but also how many people don't get infected in households. And those that collect data, they tend to ignore the negatives and just publish the positives. And so you can't estimate any ratio that you might be interested in if you only have the positive but not the total. So that these are challenges that still exist, but it's almost impossible to phrase it as a challenge. The challenge is, please, those who collect data, can you also collect the denominator? But that's not a challenge. So I didn't know how to phrase it.
Yeah, I think there is a challenge there, though, in terms of how, laying out some principles where if even if you're collecting data for a specific purpose, then you think about the denominator population, or whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. I think there probably is a wider challenge there to make operational data or happenstance data, whatever you want to call it, more useful generically.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that Delve talked about. Why don't we just have routinely gathered movement data that gives us some kind of snapshot of where our mobility is, and you could de-anonymize it. It could be a very valuable national resource. I think it's a really interesting question about what those principles would look like. I mean, actually, a little bit of development of those principles could be very helpful for the next time we talk. We probably got to think about how we shape our activity in the next week, so we make some progress. I mean, we've kind of put stuff together, refined it. We developed it originally separately. Is now the time to kind of divide and conquer, or are people still happy to keep on working? I mean, it's a very coarse method of collaborative working, but it's kind of working. Just taking the paper, modifying it, putting a new release up. I mean, how do people want to work on this? Or should we say, if Ian, for example, or Lorenzo was to help and throw in material to a particular section, we carve the thing back up.
A possible solution, at least from my side, is that for the moment I throw the bullet point list there.
Yeah.
I didn't want to kind of change the structure of the paper because people have worked on it. Who am I to come in at the last minute and just change what other people have done before? If then someone who is coordinating the paper thinks that is a challenge, then we can and gives me or me and a couple of people with me to kind of focus on a particular challenge. We take it as a task and we just do it.
I mean, I am quite keen to try and keep holding the pen if I can, at least so there's a kind of a guiding mind. But I need the content from you variously. So if you throw that bullet point in, have you put it in, Lorenzo? No, you're going to.
I'm doing it now.
Yeah, brilliant. I think some really good insights around life cycles and models have been surfaced again today. It'd be great if they could be slightly just made more consistent with the style. I think overall, Valerie's point is let's orient this towards. Keep remembering it's about challenge and not just about a COVID-19 narrative. Although I really think it's important that we draw our insights off the experience, so but try and generalize as far as we can. Yeah. So
bookkeeping, Nigel. I suggest you're the person to archive everything that you think is now probably redundant, but stick it in the archive in case anyone wants to protest. And just, I suppose, to remind people that if they're dumping things in, it's quite nice to, if they're putting in bits to do with sections, it's quite nice if they give them names beginning with their section number, so that they'll show up in people's lists in sort of, easily recognize where they belong. So.
I mean, there's a question about whether we refactor the structure slightly, because I mean, I think I just so it doesn't look too lopsided, and I'll take a look at that again. But I mean, there's nothing obviously missing. I don't think people feel that we've completely missed. There are one or two things that are undeveloped. I mean, of course, there's data skills, but we know kind of what would say there. I'm sure that it's the usual kind of injunction that we need more of it. But Valerie, any top level advice?
No, I mean there's loads of really, really good stuff there, and it's just a question of trying to angle it right. But I think anything we can do, what we've been trying to do with the other papers, is really to make it clear that you can see what the challenges are. You know, in a phrase or something, there's a challenge to do with this, and then we explore it. But really, this is still, I think, a bit of a narrative.
Yes, it is. Yes,
which is great, and we want all that stuff. But if we can really just try to identify what the challenges are, if we think about it in terms of work that we would like to see done in the next few years, so that we're in a better place to tackle another big emergency, then I think that might help to sort of think, what would we like put in place?
Yeah. Okay. And it would be. I think what's come through today, though, is there is this very tight coupling between life cycles, data, estimators, what have you. I think reflecting on that more substantively will also motivate why pipeline models are going to end up being pretty important. So I think that's down to Ben and Richard and Glenn, of course, but that'd be great. All right. Well, we're convening again this time next week, I believe. Yeah.
Is it? Yes. Could we just clarify? Is it 10:30 again, or are we going? I wasn't sure whether we were sticking with this, or I thought you mentioned going back to 10. But I mean, I don't mind either way. It's just what
yes.
works for people.
Yeah. No, I know what the catastrophic challenge I have next week is a thing called Principals Collections, which is I have to see every student virtually in the college for 5 minutes each. So that destroys 2 days of my life next week, one of which is Thursday. So yeah, we would, I mean, I don't know whether it's completely unseemly, but I mean, to be able to meet next week, we'd have to kind of move earlier actually to like 9:30, but that may be too grisly. Or we
how do people, well, obviously we haven't got everybody, but how do those of us who are here feel about 9:30? I mean, I'm fine with it, but
Fine with that.
and then certainly the following week
okay.
revert to normal. But if we could just do 9:30, can send a little note round saying it's 9:30, and then we will fall back. I think 10:30 is a bit more civil, actually. I find it's a bit easier. So the following week, 10:30, as we have done. and keeping it to about 50 minutes is about right. Yeah.
So if we put that in the Slack channel, will that get everybody hopefully?
Yeah, well, I think we just need to keep expanding this because we get more people coming in, which is nice to see. Actually, I think people are clearly interested in the work. That's good. I thought Lorenzo's comments were really helpful, and that was great. And Jasmine has been helping as well. So we've got that really important grounding from the people who've been doing the modelling. So 9:30 next week, and then 10:30 the following week, and we hopefully will have iterated to a point where we're getting quite a stable product by then. Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. All right. Thanks, Dennis. Cheers. Thank you. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.